Welcome to another episode of Deep Dive Podcast. Hope you are doing well and taking good care of yourself. We go beyond the headlines and uncover the truth behind real stories, real crimes, and real consequences. Let's move towards today's topic.
Chicago, February 21st, 1977. And if you know anything about the Midwest, you know this wasn't just any winter. I mean, this was the season that felt like it had a personal vendetta against the city.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The snow was piled high enough to bury cars. The wind coming off Lake Michigan was cutting through coats like they were paper.
And the temperatures were hovering in that zone where your breath freezes before it even leaves your mouth. It was
Yeah.
just a bitter, biting kind of night.
It really sets a specific stage, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That kind of weather, it drives everyone inward. It turns this, bustling metropolis into a collection of isolated, frozen islands.
Right. People lock their doors, they close their curtains, and they stay inside.
It creates this sense of containment, of secrets being kept behind thick brick walls. And we are focusing on one specific set of walls tonight, 2740 North Pine Grove Avenue, a looming 21-story apartment building in the Edgewater neighborhood.
Apartment 15B, that's our focus point. It's quiet, it's cold, and then around 8:30 p.m., the smell of smoke starts drifting through the hallways of that 15th floor. And, usually a fire's where the evidence disappears. It's the end of the story. But in this case, the fire was just the opening act.
Exactly. What we're looking at today is something that completely defies the standard police procedural. Usually we talk about forensics, DNA, fingerprints, the tangible stuff.
The hard evidence.
Right. But today, we're looking at a case that sits entirely alone in the annals of American criminal justice. This is the perfect crime that wasn't.
And the reason it wasn't perfect is the hook that grabbed me immediately.
Yeah.
Because usually when the police hit a brick wall, when there are no witnesses, no leads, the case goes cold. It just gathers dust in a basement somewhere.
Sure.
But in this case, the victim, well, let's just say she wasn't quite done talking.
And that brings us to the central mystery and the mission of this deep dive.
Yeah.
We're exploring the murder of Teresita Basa. On the surface, it looks like a brutal, senseless tragedy that left detectives with absolutely zero leads.
Nothing.
But the solution. The way this case was cracked, it involves a voice from the grave.
And we have to be really clear here. We're not speaking metaphorically. This isn't some diary found under a floorboard or a secret tape recording she left behind.
No, not at all.
We are talking about the concept of a voice from the grave in the most literal, most supernatural sense possible.
It's a narrative that forces us to look at the intersection of, hard-nosed, skeptical 1970s police work and the unexplainable power of the human spirit.
Right.
We're going to explore how supernatural power, specifically spirit possession, intertangled with standard investigation techniques to bring a killer to justice.
It's the only case in U.S. history where a ghost's testimony, that's essentially what it was, provided the probable cause that helped put a man behind bars.
It's incredible.
So let's unpack this, because before we can even get to the ghost, we have to understand the person.
Right.
We need to know who Teresita Basa was before she became a headline in a ghost story.
Context is absolutely everything here. Teresita was 47 years old when she died, but her life began thousands of miles away in the Philippines. She was burned in 1929. And this isn't just a biographical footnote. It's crucial to understanding the later events. She came from a very prominent, very wealthy family. Her father, Pedro Basa, was a lawyer who eventually became a judge.
So we're talking about high society, basically.
Oh, absolutely. Her mother, Socorro, was also from a well-to-do background. She wasn't just some anonymous immigrant trying to scrape by. She had a pedigree. She grew up with servants, private education, the best of everything.
A completely different
A
world.
different world. And she was deeply cultured. But music was her absolute life.
Yeah, I read that she was incredibly dedicated to the piano. This wasn't just a hobby for her, right? This was professional level stuff.
She was a virtuoso. She studied piano in Manila and later went on to the Royal College of Music in London.
Wow.
Think about the discipline that requires. The hours of practice, the precision, the intellectual capacity to understand these complex compositions. At the time of her death, she was actually pursuing a master's degree and writing a thesis on the Russian composer Alexander Terepnin. She was even publishing a book.
That paints a picture of someone who is deeply intellectual, artistic, and really focused. So why leave that? Why leave the Philippines, this life of comfort, to end up in Chicago working as a respiratory therapist?
It seems like she was looking for a thrill, or, maybe just a new chapter. She spent the first 35 years of her life in a very protected, perhaps somewhat uneventful environment in the Philippines.
Okay.
In her mid-30s, she decided she wanted to experience the world. She came to the U.S., initially on a student visa, and eventually settled in Chicago. Respiratory therapy was a way to pay the bills, to support her independence, but her soul was still in that music.
But her life in Chicago wasn't exactly a thrill ride, was it? From all accounts, she was very reserved. She wasn't out partying.
Not at all. She was described as polite, dedicated, but solitary. She lived alone in apartment 15B. And there's a specific reason for her solitude that we really need to touch on, because it paints a picture of her emotional state and her vulnerability.
This is the backstory with the fiancé, Edward O'Mara.
Correct. Years prior, back in the Philippines, she had a relationship with him. They were serious. I mean, they were actually planning to get married.
So what happened?
Well, during a trip, a family friend caught Edward in a, let's just say, a very compromising position with another woman in a red light district.
Oh, wow. And her father, being a judge and a man of high moral standing, he wasn't going to tolerate that.
Absolutely not. Her father kicked Edward out immediately. The engagement was over. And Teresita was just devastated.
I can't even imagine.
That kind of heartbreak, especially when you come from a culture that values reputation and tradition so highly, it leaves a mark. And it seemed to follow her to Chicago. It made her guarded.
So she sort of retreated into herself.
She did. She didn't date much. She focused on her work and her music. She was deeply religious, and, as the autopsy would later confirm, she was still a virgin at age 47.
That detail is actually crucial for the investigation later on, isn't it? It establishes her as what you'd call a low-risk victim.
Precisely. In criminology, we talk about victimology. If someone is involved in high-risk activities, drugs, gangs, volatile affairs, their risk of violence goes up. Teresita was the complete opposite.
She's a wealthy, conservative, religious woman living in a high-security building with a doorman.
Right. She had no enemies. She lived a quiet life. She was the absolute last person you would expect to be the victim of such a brutal murder.
Which makes the violence of February 21st, 1977 all the more shocking. So let's go back to that night. It's around 8:30 p.m. Neighbors in the building start smelling smoke.
And in a high-rise, smoke is terrifying. It travels through the vents everywhere. The neighbors call the fire department. The firefighters arrive at the 15th floor and realize the smoke is pouring out from under the door of apartment 15B.
They try the handle, locked.
Not just closed, but locked.
Yeah.
And locked from the outside. That is a massive red flag immediately.
Yeah, explain that. Why is that so significant?
Well, if you're inside and a fire starts accidentally, you unlock the door to escape. If you're overcome by smoke, the door is usually just closed, maybe unlocked.
Yeah.
To find it locked suggests that whoever was last there wanted to keep people out or to keep something in.
So they get the building manager to open it with a master key. Describe what they find inside.
It's a smoke-filled nightmare. The visibility is low. They find a fire burning in the middle of the bedroom floor. It's just a pile of clothes on top of a mattress.
And when they lift the mattress,
They find Teresita. She's completely naked. Her legs are spread eagle, and buried deep in her chest is a butcher knife.
just a horrific, visceral scene. And because she was naked, the police immediately jumped to a conclusion, right?
It's the logical first assumption for any homicide detective walking into that room. You find a naked female victim posed in that manner. You assume sexual assault was the motive, maybe a robbery gone wrong that turned into a sexual attack.
And the apartment looked ransacked.
It had been tossed, drawers pulled out. It looked like chaos.
But there's a weird detail about the fire. It didn't actually burn the apartment down.
And this is where physics, or maybe you could call it fate, intervened. The killer clearly set the fire to destroy the evidence. He piled clothes on her, set the mattress alight. He wanted to burn the body, burn DNA, burn everything. But the apartment was so well sealed against that bitter winter cold that the fire consumed all the available oxygen and then it choked.
It suffocated itself.
Exactly. It just smoldered. And it created what forensic experts might call a preservation oven. Instead of destroying the body, the heat and lack of oxygen actually preserved it. It prevented decomposition.
So when the police arrived, the evidence was basically intact.
Shockingly intact. So detectives Joseph Stachula and Lee Eplin are on the case. These are experienced guys. Stachula had solved dozens of murders. They start working the scene, and then the autopsy comes back with the first major twist.
Okay, what is it?
The medical examiner determines that despite the staging, the nudity, the spread legs, there was absolutely no evidence of sexual assault. As we mentioned, Teresita was a virgin.
So the killer stripped her specifically to throw the police off, to make it look like a sex crime.
That's the profile that starts to emerge. This wasn't a crime of passion in the sexual sense. It was a cold, calculating move. The killer took the time after the murder to remove her clothes and pose her body just to mislead the investigation.
That shows a certain level of criminal awareness, but also just a deep callousness.
Absolutely. So now the police have to pivot. It's not a sex crime. Is it a robbery?
It looks like it, right? The apartment was ransacked.
It looks like it. But strangely, not everything of value was taken. There were still some nice things left behind. It was messy, but not clean.
So what clues did they actually have? Because usually in a struggle like that, there's something left behind.
Very, very little. They found a note near the telephone. It simply said, "Get tickets for AS."
Get tickets for AS. That sounds like a lead, but at the same time, it's incredibly vague.
It's maddeningly vague. AS are just initials. In a city the size of Chicago, that could be thousands of people. Even if you narrow it down to the hospital staff or her circle of friends, AS isn't a smoking gun. It's barely a whisper.
Okay, so that's one thing. What else? They also found some beer cans, right?
Crushed Budweiser beer cans in the wastebasket. They dusted them for fingerprints.
Did Teresita drink beer? I mean, that doesn't really fit the profile you've painted.
Not really, no. It wasn't her style. So the assumption was that the killer drank them, or maybe a guest. But here's the problem. When they ran the prints found on the cans, they didn't match anyone in the system.
And there was no forced entry.
None. The lock wasn't picked, the door wasn't kicked in. Teresita had let her killer in. She opened the door for him.
Which implies she knew him. She was a cautious woman living alone in a big city. She wouldn't just open the door for a stranger at 8 p.m. on a Monday night.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the police start looking at the men in her life. They interview a few people. There's a friend named Robert Knutson who sometimes drank beer with her. He was a logical suspect.
Makes sense.
They checked him out.
Yeah.
His fingerprints didn't match the beer cans. He had an alibi. Cleared.
Okay, who else? They also looked at a professor she was working with, you said.
Right, Stephen Barath. He was helping her with her book on Russian music. And this looked promising because there were reports of some financial disagreements regarding the publishing of the book.
Money is a classic motive.
Always. But again, they drilled down. Fingerprints didn't match. He had a solid alibi. He was cleared.
And there was a report of a man knocking on her door earlier that day.
Ralph Magner. Witnesses saw him knocking. Police tracked him down, grilled him, even gave him a lie detector test.
And he passed.
He passed. His prints didn't match the cans. Another dead end.
So you have 3 potential suspects, all cleared. The fingerprints on the beer cans don't match anyone in the system. The AS note is too vague to act on.
And that is where the investigation just hits a brick wall. By August of 1977, 5 months later, the case is stone cold. The Chicago police had solved 17 other homicides in that time frame, but Teresita Boss's file was effectively closed. He had completely run out of road.
This is the point where, in a normal story, the family grieves, the file gathers dust, and justice is never served. The killer got away with it.
Right.
But this is not a normal story. This is where we take a sharp left turn into the Twilight Zone.
Enter Dr. Jose Chua and his wife, Remibius Remy Chua.
Now, we need to understand who these people are. Did Remy know Teresita well? Were they close friends?
They were acquaintances, and that is the key word here. They were both Filipino, both worked as respiratory therapists at Edgewater Hospital. But they weren't close friends. They didn't hang out socially outside of work. They didn't share secrets.
So just colleagues.
Just colleagues. Remy was married to Dr. Jose Chua, a surgeon. They lived a very normal professional life in the suburbs.
Until July 1977, 5 months after the murder. What happens to Remy?
It starts at the hospital. Remy is in the lounge, taking a break, when suddenly she freezes. She's staring into space, completely terrified. She later tells her colleagues and her husband that she saw the spirit of Teresita Basa standing there.
Okay, seeing a ghost is one thing. People claim to see things, especially when they're stressed or grieving for a colleague. But her behavior starts to change, doesn't it?
Drastically. It wasn't just a visual thing, it became behavioral. Remy, who reportedly didn't play the piano, suddenly starts sitting at the piano and playing. She starts singing, which wasn't like her. She begins acting with the mannerisms of Teresita.
And this wasn't something she could control.
It seems not. It got so bad, so erratic, that the hospital actually fired her.
Wow. So this wasn't just a feeling or a plea for attention. This was disrupting her entire livelihood. She lost her job over this.
And that was just the beginning. The hauntings, or whatever you want to call them, followed her home. This brings us to the possession.
Let's really unpack this, because possession is such a loaded word. We've all seen the movies. But what was physically happening to Remy Chua in her home?
According to her husband, Dr. Chua, Remy would fall into a trance-like state. She would lie on the bed, her body becoming incredibly stiff, almost rigid.
Like catatonic?
Almost. Her eyes would widen and stare blankly at the ceiling. And then she would speak.
But not in her own voice?
No. And this is one of the most compelling pieces of evidence for this supernatural angle. The voice that came out of Remy Chua was different. It spoke in Tagalog, the language of the Philippines, but with a very specific accent.
Tell me more about that accent. Why does that matter so much?
Well, language is like a fingerprint, right? Remy spoke a standard dialect, but Teresita, she came from that wealthy Spanish-influenced upper class we talked about earlier.
Right, the judge's daughter.
Exactly. She spoke a very specific patrician dialect of Tagalog, heavily peppered with Spanish phrases and inflections. It was the dialect of the elite. When Remy was in these trances, the voice spoke in Teresita's exact dialect.
That is chilling. That's a detail you can't just make up.
It's very hard to explain away. So you have Remy lying stiff on the bed, speaking in a voice that isn't hers, using a dialect she doesn't naturally use. And what does this voice say?
What does it say?
The voice says, "I am Teresita Basa."
I am Teresita Basa. Just hearing that, even now, it gives me goosebumps. And she's talking to Dr. Chua, Remy's husband.
Yes. The spirit through Remy begins to plead with Dr. Chua. She says, "Doctor, I need your help. The man who killed me is still free. I cannot rest."
And this goes on for a while, right? This isn't just a one-time thing.
It happens multiple times. And you have to remember, Dr. Chua is a man of science. He's a surgeon. He deals with anatomy, physiology, hard facts. He is understandably skeptical and, frankly, terrified.
He must be questioning his own sanity.
He must be. He asks the spirit, "What do you want me to do?" And the spirit says, "You must go to the police."
Imagine being Dr. Chua. You're watching your wife transform into a dead woman. But eventually the spirit doesn't just ask for help. She gives him something actionable. She names names.
She does. In one of these trances, Teresita's spirit says explicitly, "The man who killed me is Alan Showery."
Alan Showery? Who is he?
He was an orderly, a respiratory technician at the same hospital. He worked with both Teresita and Remy. He was a co-worker.
Okay, so a co-worker. But just a name isn't enough for the police. A ghost told me Alan did it. Is not going to get you a warrant. Did the spirit give any other details?
This is where it gets fascinating, and where the argument for supernatural knowledge becomes very, very strong. The spirit provides a detailed narrative of the murder that no one else could have known. She tells Dr. Chua, "Alan came to my apartment to fix my TV."
To fix the TV, that explains why she would have let him in. No forced entry.
Exactly. She says he came in, he looked at the TV, but realized he didn't have the right tools, so he left. Then he came back a short while later. and Teresita let him in again.
Because she trusted him. He was a coworker helping her out. It establishes a timeline entry, exit, re-entry.
Right. The spirit says that as she was turning to lock the door, specifically engaging the chain lock, he attacked her from behind. He put her in a chokehold.
A chokehold. That fits with the lack of screaming, the lack of struggle marks on her hands. It was a surprise attack.
A total surprise attack. He choked her until she was unconscious. Then he stabbed her to silence her, and he staged the scene. But here is the smoking gun. Dr. Chua tells the spirit, "The police won't believe me. I need proof. I can't just walk in there and say a ghost told me."
A very valid point. You need physical evidence.
The spirit understands this. She tells Dr. Chua, "He stole my jewelry. Specifically, a pearl cocktail ring and a jade pendant. These were heirlooms from her mother."
And does she say where they are?
She tells him exactly where they are. She says Alan Showery gave the jewelry to his girlfriend.
This is incredibly precise. We're not talking about some vague vision like look near the water or he's a dark-haired man. We are talking about specific items given to a specific person.
And that is what finally convinces Dr. Chua to act. The burden of this information is just too heavy. He fears for his wife's sanity, maybe even her life. He realizes this isn't going to stop until he does something, so he makes the call.
He calls the police. Now you have to imagine being Detective Stachula receiving this call. "Hello, Detective. My wife is possessed by the victim in your cold case, and she solved it for you."
Stachula was a veteran. When he first met with the Chuas, he was obviously deeply skeptical. He's thinking, okay, maybe this woman heard some gossip at the hospital. Maybe she's looking for attention.
Or maybe she's involved somehow.
Or maybe she's involved. But he's also desperate. The case is dead. He has nothing else to go on. So he decides to meet them. But he also decides to test them.
The test. This is my favorite part of the story because it shows that Stachula was a good cop. He wasn't just blindly following some wild lead.
He was smart. He asked Dr. Chua, and by extension, the spirit, a question that only the killer and the police would know the answer to. This is what's called holdback evidence. He asks, was Teresita sexually assaulted?
And remember, the media had reported that she was found naked. Everyone in Chicago who read the paper assumed it was a sex crime.
Correct. If Remy Chua was just guessing or going off gossip or trying to fit the narrative, she would likely say, yes, of course.
It's the logical answer.
It's the logical answer. But the spirit, through Remy, answers firmly, no, I was not.
That had to be the moment Stachula's blood ran cold.
That was the turning point. That single verification proved that the source of this information, whether you believe it's a ghost, a psychic projection, or something else entirely, had intimate knowledge of the crime scene that was not public. Stachula decided to treat the information as a valid tip.
So, armed with the name Alan Showery, police work kicks back into gear. And suddenly, all these little things start clicking into place.
They go back to that note. Get tickets for AS.
AS Alan Showery.
It was staring them in the face the whole time. But without the name, it was meaningless. Now it's corroboration.
And they find out more about him, right?
They do. They discover that Alan Showery lived very close to Teresita, just a few blocks away. And when they run a background check, they find he has a record. Some theft, some other minor issues. He wasn't a clean slate.
So they have a suspect. They have a motive robbery. They have the proximity. But they still need the physical evidence. The jewelry. If they find that jewelry where the ghost said it was, it's game over.
Police track down Alan Showery. He had moved since the murder, but they found him living with his girlfriend, a woman named Yanka. And she was pregnant at the time.
And the detectives handle this carefully. They don't just kick down the door and arrest Alan.
No, Stachula and Eplin are smart. They wait until Alan is away or they separate him, and they speak to Yanka alone.
They ask her, very straightforwardly, did Alan give you any jewelry recently? Maybe around last February. She says yes. She goes to her jewelry box and produces 2 items. A pearl cocktail ring and a jade pendant.
Unbelievable. The ghost was right, down to the absolute last detail. The police then bring in Teresita's cousins, Ron and Ken, to identify the items. They take one look and confirm it immediately. That is Teresita's ring. That is her pendant. They do the jewelry well because it was family heirloom quality.
At this point, the investigation has shifted from a dead-end cold case to a complete slam dunk. Alan Showery is done. He just doesn't know it yet.
Exactly. The police bring Alan in for interrogation. Initially, he plays it cool. He denies everything. I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't kill her. I barely knew her.
But then they put the jewelry on the table.
They lay it out. They tell him, we found this with Yanka. We know you took it. We know you went to fix the TV. We know you staged the fire. They lay out the entire narrative.
How does he react to that?
It just crumbles. You have to imagine the psychological weight of that moment. He thought he'd gotten away with it. 5 months had passed. It was over. And suddenly the police know everything. Confronted with the physical evidence that corroborated the spirit's story, Alan Showery confesses.
And his confession matches the ghost's account, detail for detail.
Almost word for word. He admitted he went to her apartment to fix the TV. He admitted she didn't have the right tools and had to leave and come back.
Wow.
He said he needed money, he was broke, Christmas had just passed, his girlfriend was pregnant. He thought Teresita, being wealthy, would have cash lying around.
So it really was just a robbery that turned into a murder.
A horribly tragic one. He claimed he killed her for a small amount of cash, about $32, and the jewelry. He admitted to the chokehold, the stabbing, and setting the fire.
Right.
He also admitted to stripping her body specifically to mislead the police into thinking it was a sex crime.
It's incredible. The supernatural lead provided the exact roadmap, and the police work just verified the destination.
That's a perfect way to put it. Without the tip about the jewelry and the name, the police never would have looked twice at Alan Showery. The AS note was too vague on its own. The ghost broke the case wide open.
But getting a confession is one thing. Getting a conviction in a court of law when your primary witness is, well, a phantom. That's a whole different legal battle.
And it was a massive battle. The case went to trial. But immediately, there were problems. The prosecution had a confession, but the defense had a very, very unique angle.
I can just imagine the defense attorney's argument. Your Honor, the prosecution's entire investigation is based on a seance. This is medieval.
Precisely. The defense argued that the confession was coerced. They argued that the police used this ghost story to scare Alan into confessing, or that the entire investigation was fruit of the poisonous tree because it originated from a source that legally doesn't exist.
They tried to invalidate the whole thing.
The whole thing, and it worked, didn't it, the first time around?
It did. The first trial ended in a mistrial. It was a hung jury. The jurors just couldn't reconcile the bizarre nature of the evidence with the strict requirements of the law. They didn't know what to make of the voice from the grave. It was just too weird for them.
So Alan Showery is still in limbo. A second trial is scheduled. And here is where we get one final spooky coincidence that really seals the supernatural power theme of this whole story.
The date, right.
The date of the second trial is set, February 21st, 1979.
February 21st, that's the anniversary of the murder.
Exactly 2 years to the day of the murder.
You cannot write this stuff. That feels like some kind of cosmic timing.
As the trial is about to begin, something changes in Alan Showery. Maybe it was the date, maybe it was the pressure of the haunting, this idea that Teresita just wasn't going to let this go. Just before the proceedings start, Alan Showery changes his plea.
He pleads guilty.
He pleads guilty to the murder. He accepts a sentence of 14 years in prison.
Why only 14 years? That seems incredibly light for such a brutal murder.
It was a plea bargain. Given the mistrial and the weirdness of the evidence, the prosecution probably wanted to guarantee a conviction rather than risk another hung jury. They took the sure thing. Showery took the deal.
How much time did he actually serve? He ended up serving only about 4 or 5 years before being released.
That is frustratingly short.
Yeah.
But he was convicted. Justice, in a legal sense, was served, and Teresita Basa is the one who ensured it.
She truly did. Without her intervention, Alan Showery would have likely lived his life completely free, and Teresita would be just another cold case statistic in a file cabinet in Chicago.
So we have to ask the big question. We're at the end of our deep dive. How? How did Remy Chua know all of this?
That is the lingering $1 million mystery. Skeptics have tried to explain it away. They suggest that perhaps Remy overheard Alan talking about it at the hospital. Or maybe she saw him with the jewelry and subconsciously pieced it all together.
But the details were just so specific. The lack of sexual assault, the note about the TV tools, the fact that Teresita was a virgin. That is where the skeptical argument really struggles. Remy didn't know Teresita well enough to know she was a virgin. She certainly wouldn't know the police had kept the lack of assault a secret from the press. And she wouldn't know Alan had left and returned because of a lack of tools. Those are intimate details of the crime scene and the killer's movements that only the killer and the victim knew.
And let's not forget the physical transformation, the voice, the specific high society dialect.
That's the kicker for me. Remy was from a different part of the Philippines. She spoke a different dialect. To spontaneously adopt the high society Spanish Tagalog accent of Teresita Basa, that's a linguistic feat that is incredibly hard to explain as some subconscious trick. It implies an external intelligence.
It really challenges your worldview. You want to be rational, you want to find a logical explanation, but the facts here just keep pointing to something else. It points to a supernatural power that simply refused to be silenced.
This case remains utterly unique in U.S. legal history. It is a moment where the supernatural didn't just provide, atmosphere for a spooky story. It provided probable cause. It provided actionable intelligence that held up under police scrutiny. It suggests that Teresita's will for justice was stronger than death itself.
Teresita Basa, the woman who solved her own murder. It's a story about justice, but it's also a story about the power of the human spirit, quite literally.
It forces us to consider that perhaps the line between the living and the dead isn't as solid as we think it is, especially when there's a wrong that needs to be righted.
So, to you listening, what do you believe? Was this a subconscious masterpiece of deduction by Remy Chua, a woman pushed to the edge by a colleague's death? Or was it truly justice from beyond the grave?
Whatever you believe, the facts remain. Teresita spoke, the police listened, and her killer was caught.
And that is where we will leave it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.
Until next time, keep questioning.
Oh, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. See you next time with another story in Deep Dive.